The cold vastness of space stretched endlessly before the human research outpost on planet X-249. Inside, James worked quietly at his station, analyzing soil samples from the planet's surface. His brown hair fell over his eyes as he peered into the microscope, completely unaware that this ordinary day would change his life forever. The first warning came as a deep rumble that shook the entire facility. Warning lights flashed red, and the emergency sirens wailed through the corridors. James jumped to his feet, his heart pounding in his chest. "We've got multiple ships entering the atmosphere," shouted Mike, the security officer, through the facility's comm system. "Everyone to the emergency shelters, now." But it was too late. The ceiling exploded inward in a shower of metal and sparks. Through the smoke and chaos, James saw them. Tall, powerful figures in gleaming armor dropping from above. Their skin had a slight purple tint, and they moved with incredible speed and grace despite their massive size. James grabbed a metal pipe from the broken wall and stood his ground. He might not be as strong as these aliens, but he wouldn't go down without a fight. That's when he saw her. Among the invading warriors stood a figure that made even them look small. Her armor was more elaborate, decorated with symbols of rank and power. She moved like a predator, confident and deadly. But it was her eyes that caught James's attention. They glowed like amethysts in the smoke-filled room, scanning the chaos until they locked onto him. "Well, well," she said in perfect English, her voice carrying both authority and amusement. "What do we have here?" James gripped his makeshift weapon tighter. "Someone who won't surrender to invaders," he replied, keeping his voice steady despite his fear. The alien commander's lips curled into what might have been a smile. "I am Princess Rhea of the Stellar Empire. And you, little human, have caught my interest." She moved faster than James could track. One moment she stood across the room. The next she had knocked the pipe from his hands and lifted him by his collar. But instead of fear, James felt anger. "Put me down," he demanded, meeting her glowing eyes with defiance. Rhea laughed, a sound like crystal bells. "Fascinating. Most species cower before me, yet you make demands." She studied him like a curious specimen. "You'll make an excellent addition to my personal collection." "I'm not a thing to be collected," James shot back, struggling against her grip. "No," Rhea agreed, surprising him. "You're much more interesting than a thing. You'll be my personal slave, human. I look forward to breaking that defiant spirit of yours." Around them, the other warriors had subdued the rest of the research team. Some were unconscious, others bound with energy restraints. James felt a mix of guilt and relief, seeing that no one appeared dead. "Load them onto the ships," Rhea commanded her warriors. "This one comes with me." As she carried James toward her personal shuttle, he caught glimpses of the destruction they'd caused. The research outpost, his home for the past 2 years, lay in ruins. But amid his anger and fear, a small part of him couldn't help but notice how gracefully Rhea moved, how her armor caught the light of the fires around them, how her eyes seemed to hold ancient wisdom despite her apparent youth. "You won't break me," James said as she secured him in the shuttle. Rhea leaned close, her alien features somehow both beautiful and terrifying. "We shall see, little human. We shall see." The shuttle doors closed, and James felt the rumble of engines starting. As they lifted off from the planet's surface, he watched his world disappear below them. He didn't know what awaited him among the stars with this alien princess, but he swore to himself he would maintain his humanity no matter what. Little did either of them know that this capture would set in motion events that would change not just their lives, but the fate of 2 civilizations forever. 2 weeks had passed since James's capture, and life aboard Princess Rhea's personal starship was nothing like he had expected. Instead of being thrown into dark dungeons, he was assigned to maintain her private gardens, a vast chamber filled with plants from 100 different worlds. Today, he carefully trimmed the leaves of a glowing blue tree while Rhea watched from her observation platform. She did this often, studying him like a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. "The luminous tree from Centauri Prime needs more water," she called down. "Its leaves are dulling." James looked up at her, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Actually, too much water makes them lose their glow. They need less water and more light." He pointed to the artificial sun panels above. "If you increase the UV output by 20%, you'll see a difference within days." Rhea's eyes narrowed. "How do you know this?" "I was a research botanist before you decided to make me your gardener," James replied, unable to keep the edge from his voice. "Plants are kind of my thing." To his surprise, Rhea descended from her platform and approached him. Up close, she towered over him. But James had stopped being intimidated by her size. He'd seen her help an injured bird in the garden when she thought no one was watching. "Show me," she commanded, but her voice held curiosity rather than authority. James explained the basic principles of the tree's biology, pointing out the specialized cells that created its bioluminescence. As he talked, he noticed Rhea's expression changing from skeptical to genuinely interested. "Your species continues to surprise me," she said finally. "Perhaps there's more to humans than we initially thought." "There's more to everything than first impressions suggest," James replied, glancing meaningfully at her. Before she could respond, alarms blared through the garden. "Princess!" A guard rushed in. "The slave quarters. There's been an accident. Several injured." Without thinking, James ran toward the door. A strong hand caught his arm. "Where do you think you're going?" Rhea demanded. "I have medical training. I can help." He met her gaze steadily. "You can either waste time punishing me for leaving without permission, or you can let me save lives. Your choice, Princess." For a long moment, Rhea stared at him. Then she released his arm. "Lead the way." In the slave quarters, they found chaos. A heating unit had exploded, leaving several aliens with severe burns. James immediately took charge, directing the uninjured to bring water and clean cloths. As he worked, treating burns and setting up makeshift bandages, he felt Rhea watching him. He didn't care. His focus was on helping the injured, slave or not. Hours later, when the situation was under control, Rhea found him cleaning up the medical supplies. "You didn't have to help them," she said quietly. "They're not your people." James straightened up, tired but satisfied. "They're people. That's enough reason to help. Even though they're slaves. Even though you're a slave." "Being a slave is what you made me," James replied. "Being human. Being someone who helps others. That's who I am. You can't take that away." Rhea stepped closer, her purple eyes searching his face. "You're either the most foolish or the most noble creature I've ever encountered." "Maybe I'm both," James smiled slightly. "Maybe we all are." That night, as James returned to his quarters, he found they had been upgraded. The small cell had been replaced with a comfortable room, complete with real windows showing the stars outside. On his desk sat a medical kit and a note in Rhea's elegant handwriting. "The garden still needs a botanist, but perhaps the ship could use a healer as well." James smiled, realizing that perhaps his captor was beginning to change. Or perhaps she had always been different from what he'd assumed, just waiting for someone to see it. The grand hall of the starship buzzed with activity as alien dignitaries gathered for Princess Rhea's annual diplomatic reception. James moved through the crowd carrying a tray of exotic drinks, his new position as a trusted servant giving him access to these high-level gatherings. He noticed Rhea standing among a group of military commanders, her impressive height and regal bearing making her stand out even in this distinguished crowd. But something felt wrong. A servant near her was moving oddly, too focused on her instead of his duties. James had learned to read body language across species during his months of captivity. The servant's movements weren't those of someone serving drinks. They were those of someone ready to strike. The glint of metal caught his eye. Without thinking, James dropped his tray and sprinted forward. "Rhea," he shouted, abandoning all protocol. Time seemed to slow. The false servant pulled out a crystalline blade, its edge glowing with deadly energy. Rhea began to turn, but too slowly. James launched himself between them, pushing Rhea aside as the blade slashed through the air where she had been standing. Pain exploded across James's chest as the blade caught him instead of its intended target. He fell hard, but managed to grab the assassin's legs, bringing him down. Guards swarmed in, subduing the attacker as chaos erupted in the hall. James, Rhea's voice cut through the commotion. She knelt beside him, her usual composure shattered. "You fool, why did you do that?" He tried to smile through the pain. "Couldn't let anything happen to my favorite captor, could I?" "Be quiet," she commanded, but her hands were gentle as she examined his wound. "Get my personal medical team here now," she shouted to her guards. As they waited for help, James felt his consciousness fading. "You know," he muttered, "I could have escaped in all this chaos." Rhea's eyes widened. She hadn't considered that. "Why didn't you?" "Because," James coughed, tasting blood. "Because I've seen who you really are, behind the throne and titles. You're worth saving." The medical team arrived, rushing him to the ship's advanced medical bay. Through the haze of pain and medication, James heard Rhea ordering them to use their best treatments. Treatments usually reserved only for her species' nobility. Hours later, James awoke to find Rhea sitting beside his bed, her usual perfect posture replaced by a tired slump. She straightened when she saw him awake. "The doctors say you'll recover fully," she said, trying to sound formal despite the relief in her voice. "The blade missed your vital organs." "Lucky me." James tried to sit up but winced. "Don't move," Rhea ordered, then added softly, "Please." They sat in silence for a moment before she spoke again. "You saved my life." "Yes. Why?" James looked at her seriously. "Because despite everything, despite being your slave, I've watched you change. You show kindness when you think no one's looking. You listen when others speak. You're not the cruel princess everyone thinks you are. I took you from your home," she reminded him. "I made you a slave." "Yes," James agreed. "And that was wrong. But people can change, Rhea. Even alien princesses." She reached out, hesitating for a moment before taking his hand. Her purple skin contrasted sharply with his. "From this moment, you are no longer a slave." James blinked in surprise. "What?" "You're free," she said firmly. "Free to leave if you wish. Though," she paused, looking uncertain for the first time since he'd known her. "Though I hope you might consider staying. As an advisor. And perhaps a friend." James squeezed her hand gently. "I'd like that. Someone needs to teach you more about proper plant care after all." Rhea laughed, a real laugh without any of her usual restraint. In that moment, something shifted between them. No longer captor and captive, but two beings from different worlds who had somehow found understanding in the vast expanse of space. The observation deck of Rhea's starship offered a breathtaking view of a passing nebula, its swirling colors painting the stars in shades of purple and blue. James stood at the window, now dressed in clothes befitting his new status as a royal advisor rather than a slave. "It's called the Butterfly Nebula," Rhea said, joining him at the window. "At least, that's what your people named it." "And what do your people call it?" James asked, noticing how the nebula's colors matched her eyes. "The warrior's last dream," she replied. "Our legends say it's where great warriors go to rest after their final battle." James turned to face her. "That's the difference between our peoples, isn't it? Where we see beauty, you see battle. And is one view better than the other?" Rhea challenged, but her tone was curious rather than defensive. "Different," James said, "not better. Like how you see strength and power, while we often find it in gentleness." Rhea moved closer to the window, her reflection overlapping with the nebula's glow. "Tell me more about Earth's concept of gentleness. It's foreign to me." James thought for a moment. "When I worked in the garden as your slave, I could have just forced the plants to grow. used chemicals, artificial lights, brute force. But instead, I learned what each plant needed. Some needed more shadow than light. Others needed to be left alone to find their own way to grow. And this applies to people as well. Exactly. True strength isn't about controlling others. It's about understanding them, helping them grow in their own way. Rhea was quiet for a long moment. In my culture, such ideas would be seen as weakness. A ruler must be strong, must command respect through fear. And yet, James said softly, "Your people love you more than they fear you. I've seen how they look at you when you show kindness. They're loyal not because of your strength, but because of your heart." "My heart," Rhea repeated, touching her chest, where her species had their equivalent of a heart. "You humans are so focused on this organ." James laughed. "It's metaphorical. We use it to represent emotions, feelings, the parts of us that make us who we are beyond just survival and power." "And what does your heart tell you about me?" Rhea asked, her voice unusually quiet. Before James could answer, a guard entered the observation deck. "Princess, the council requests your presence. There are concerns about your recent changes in policy." Rhea straightened, her royal mask sliding back into place. "Very well. James, would you accompany me?" I believe they could benefit from hearing a human perspective. As they walked to the council chamber, James noticed Rhea's tension. "What troubles you?" "The council fears I'm becoming too human in my thinking. Too soft." She stopped walking. "Perhaps they're right. A month ago, I would have executed that assassin without trial. Now I'm considering rehabilitation. And is that making you a worse leader or a better one?" Rhea looked at him, really looked at him. "I don't know. Everything I was taught tells me one thing, but everything I'm learning from you suggests another path." "Maybe," James suggested, "the strongest path is the one where you don't have to choose between what you were taught and what you're learning. Maybe true strength is in finding a way to blend both." A small smile touched Rhea's lips. "There you go again, teaching me about gentle strength. And there you go again, proving you already had it within you." James gestured to the council chamber doors. "Shall we show them what human and alien wisdom can achieve together?" Rhea squared her shoulders, but her expression was softer than it would have been months ago. "Together then. Though I warn you, council meetings can be quite intense." "I survived being your slave," James teased. "I think I can handle a few grumpy politicians." Their laughter echoed down the corridor as they entered the chamber, a sound that would have been unthinkable when they first met. Sometimes, James realized, the greatest changes happen not through force or power, but through the simple act of two different beings learning to see the universe through each other's eyes. The council chamber hummed with tension as Rhea faced the assembled leaders of her empire. James stood slightly behind her, acutely aware of the hostile glares directed at him from several council members. "This is unprecedented." Lord Crix, the oldest member of the council, slammed his fist on the table. "A human advising the royal court. What next? Shall we invite the maintenance droids to vote on imperial policy?" Rhea's voice remained calm, but James could see the slight tightening of her shoulders. James has proven his worth many times over. His insights have already improved our agricultural yields by 30%. "And what of tradition?" Lady Ven spoke up, her silver eyes narrowing. "Our empire was built on strength, not on coddling lesser species." "Perhaps," James said, stepping forward despite protocol, "your empire could be even stronger by combining different viewpoints rather than rejecting them." The chamber erupted in outraged murmurs. Rhea raised her hand for silence, but Lord Crix was already moving around the table. "You dare speak in this chamber?" he hissed at James. "Princess, this human has bewitched you. Can't you see how he undermines our very way of life?" "The only thing being undermined," Rhea replied coolly, "is your assumption that different means inferior." Suddenly, the chamber doors burst open. A messenger rushed in, face flushed with urgency. "My lords and ladies, The outer colonies are reporting unprecedented crop yields. The humans' agricultural methods, they're working better than anything we've tried in centuries. James watched as confusion rippled through the council. Success was something they understood, even if they didn't like its source. Lord Crix recovered first. A single success doesn't justify such radical changes to our society. Princess, there are rumors. Disturbing rumors about your relationship with this human. Rhea stiffened. My personal matters are not council business. They are when they affect the Empire, Lady Van interjected. The military captains talk of how you've gone soft. The noble houses whisper about human corruption of royal blood. James felt his heart race. He hadn't realized their growing friendship had caused such political turbulence. Enough. Rhea's voice cracked like thunder. I am still your princess. My choices have made our empire stronger, not weaker. Or shall we discuss the reduction in slave revolts since I implemented more humane policies? The council members shifted uncomfortably. It was true. Violence had decreased significantly in recent months. My princess, a younger council member spoke up hesitantly. Perhaps there is wisdom in change, but it must be handled carefully. The old families are resistant to such rapid transformation. James saw his opportunity. What if we introduce changes gradually? Start with practical improvements. Agriculture, medicine, education. Show results before tackling social changes. Rhea glanced at him, understanding dawning in her eyes. A demonstration of strength through progress rather than force. The council chamber grew quiet as members considered this approach. Finally, Lord Crix spoke, his voice resigned. The princess's judgment has served us well in the past. Perhaps we can observe these changes before passing judgment. A trial period, Lady Ven suggested. But watch yourself, human. One misstep. The threat hung in the air as the council session ended. As members filed out, Rhea and James remained behind. That was close, James murmured. It's not over, Rhea replied. They'll be watching us carefully now. One failure. Then we won't fail. James met her gaze. Your people respect results. We'll give them results they can't ignore. Rhea's expression softened slightly. You're willing to stay and face this with me? Of course. James smiled. Besides, someone needs to make sure your garden doesn't die. A small laugh escaped her, but her eyes remained serious. James, what they said about rumors. Let's focus on winning over your council first, he said gently. Some changes need time to grow, like those stubborn centauri trees in your garden. Rhea nodded, but James noticed she stood closer to him than protocol required. As they left the chamber together, both knew that political intrigue was just beginning, and their greatest challenges still lay ahead. The royal gardens had become their sanctuary, a place where princess and former slave could speak freely. Tonight, the artificial moons cast silver light across the exotic flowers, while James and Rhea sat beside the luminous tree that had first brought them together. The noble houses have presented their candidates, Rhea said quietly, running her fingers through the glowing leaves. The council expects me to choose a mate from among them within the month. James felt his heart tighten, but kept his voice steady. I assume they've selected the strongest warriors and most politically connected nobles. Of course. Rhea's laugh held no humor. Lord Crix's son heads the list. He's everything my people expect in a royal consort. Powerful, ruthless, pure-blooded, and everything you've been fighting against these past months, James added softly. Rhea turned to face him, her purple eyes reflecting the bioluminescent glow around them. The Empire has had arranged royal marriages for 10,000 years. It's considered essential for maintaining pure bloodlines and political alliances. But I've learned there are different kinds of strength. She reached out, her hand hovering near his but not quite touching. Different ways of seeing the universe. Before James could respond, a group of guards approached. Princess, Lord Crix's son requests an audience. He brings gifts to honor your upcoming selection. Rhea straightened, her royal mask sliding into place. Very well. I'll receive him in the throne room. After the guards left, James stood. I should go. It wouldn't be appropriate for a human advisor to be present during such a meeting. James, Rhea caught his arm. Stay, please. He shook his head. You have duties, responsibilities. I've already caused enough political turmoil. Maybe it would be better if I left the ship entirely. Left. For a moment, her composed facade cracked. You would abandon everything we've built here. To protect you. Yes. James met her gaze steadily. Your people are just starting to accept change. If they think their princess is being influenced by human emotions. So you'd make the choice for me. Anger flashed in her eyes. Just like the council. Just like tradition. No, James said gently. I'm giving you the freedom to choose without complications. Your empire needs you, Rhea. They need you to lead them into the future, but they're not ready for too much change too quickly. And what about what I need? Her voice was barely a whisper. Before he could answer, more guards appeared. Princess, Lord Crix's son grows impatient. Rhea closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, they held a decision. Tell him I'll be there shortly. As the guards left, she turned back to James. This isn't finished. Promise me you won't leave until we've talked properly. I promise, James said, knowing it would only make things harder. He watched her walk away, her tall figure regal and commanding. Everything a princess should be. Everything her people needed her to be. Later that night, James began packing his few possessions. A pressed flower from Earth he'd somehow kept through his captivity. Books Rhea had given him about her people's history. A small crystal that captured starlight. A knock at his door made him pause. But instead of Rhea, he found a young servant holding a note. The handwriting was unmistakably hers. Meet me in the garden at midnight. Before you make choices for both of us, remember what you taught me about letting things grow in their own way. Some traditions need to change. Some risks are worth taking. James stared at the note for a long time. Through his window, he could see the garden where everything had started, where a princess had learned about gentle strength, and a captive had found freedom in unexpected ways. The ship's chronometer showed 23:45. In 15 minutes, he would have to make a choice that would affect not just 2 lives, but potentially an entire empire. The crystal in his hand caught the starlight, scattering it like hope across the walls. The midnight hour found James in the garden, standing beneath the now fully blooming luminous tree. Its blue glow painted shadows across his face as he waited, his heart pounding with each passing moment. The garden doors opened silently. Rhea entered, but not in her usual royal attire. Instead, she wore a simple white dress that seemed to catch and hold the starlight. You came, she said, relief clear in her voice. I promised I would. James gestured to his packed bag by the garden entrance. Though I still think. No. Rhea closed the distance between them. You've done enough thinking for both of us. Now it's time to listen. She reached out and took his hand, her purple skin warm against his. I've spent the evening in the royal archives, studying our oldest laws. Laws that predate even the council. What did you find? A smile curved her lips. Our first empress, the one who united the star systems, wasn't of pure blood. She was a hybrid. Part of her genetics came from a species we considered inferior. James's eyes widened. The council knows this. They've forgotten, or chosen to forget. Rhea's eyes sparkled with determination. But the law she wrote still stands. The royal line is defined not by blood purity, but by the ability to lead the empire toward prosperity and peace. Rhea, James started, but she pressed a finger to his lips. I've called an assembly, not just the council, but representatives from every part of the empire, including the former slave colonies. She took a deep breath. I'm going to tell them everything. About how a human slave taught their princess the true meaning of strength. About how our empire has grown stronger through cooperation rather than domination. They might reject it completely, James warned. You could lose everything, or we could change everything. She squeezed his hand. The crop yields have tripled. The slave revolts have ended. Trade with former enemy systems has begun, all because we dared to think differently. Suddenly, the garden lights brightened. Around them, people began filing in. Council members, colony representatives, ship crews, even former slaves, all gathering in the garden where change had first taken root. Rhea turned to address them, but kept hold of James's hand. "My people," her voice carried clearly through the night air. "For 10,000 years, we've equated strength with dominance. But look around you. Look at what we've achieved through understanding instead of force." She gestured to the thriving garden. "These plants grow not because we commanded them to, but because we learned to give them what they truly needed. The same is true of people, all people, regardless of their species." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Lord Crick stepped forward, his face tight with anger. "You would throw away millennia of tradition for a human?" "No." Rhea's voice grew stronger. "I would honor our oldest traditions by leading our empire toward true greatness, not through fear, but through unity. Not through force, but through understanding." She turned to James, her eyes filled with both question and certainty. "The human who was brought here as a slave showed us a different kind of strength. And in doing so, he didn't just steal my heart. He showed us all a better way forward." The garden fell silent. Then, from the back, a young colony representative began to clap. Others joined in, slowly at first, then building to a thunderous applause. As the sound washed over them, Rhea leaned close to James. "Stay," she whispered. "Not as an advisor, not as a former slave, but as my equal. Help me build this new empire." James looked at their joined hands, at the mix of purple and human skin tones. "Together. Together," she confirmed. "After all, someone needs to make sure I don't overwater the luminous tree." Their laughter joined the continuing applause, rising up through the garden into the star-filled sky above. And in that moment, both human and alien knew that while their story had begun with captivity, it would continue with something far more powerful, love that could transform not just hearts, but entire empires. The end.